You know that feeling, right? You're in a conversation and you can just tell the other person isn't really hearing you. They're just waiting for their turn to talk. Well, today we're going to dive into a skill that can totally change the game, both at work and at home. It's called active listening. And trust me, it's so much more than just being quiet. It's this powerful tool for real connection and, honestly, just clarity. So let's get into it and figure out what it really means to listen. I mean, this quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Most people don't listen, they reload. So often, our conversations feel less like a real connection and more like, I don't know, a verbal chess match. We're not listening to actually understand. Nope. We're listening for a weakness, for an opening, for that perfect moment to jump in with our point. We're reloading. And this one little habit, it has a massive and usually hidden cost. All right, so let's talk about that cost. What exactly are we talking about here? It goes way beyond just simple misunderstandings. When we fail to truly hear each other, we end up creating all this friction, this pain, and just waste, really, in pretty much every corner of our lives. Let's actually break down what these hidden costs look like, because they're everywhere. First up, you've got triangulation and drama. You know what this is. Instead of talking to the person you have an issue with, you go talk about them to someone else. Classic. Then there's assumption inflation. This is where we fill in the blanks with our own stories, and let's be honest, they're usually negative stories, about what the other person must be thinking. This stuff leads to compounded hurt. Little things that weren't heard just pile up and up until they become this huge resentment. And, at work, it creates just a massive amount of operational waste from people just not being on the same page. But maybe the worst one is identity erosion. That's when you're ignored so consistently that you learn your voice just doesn't matter. So, you stop trying. And this quote just nails the core problem. See all those unspoken frustrations? They don't just vanish into thin air. Oh no, they fester. They come out sideways, as passive aggression or resentment or those sudden blow-ups that seem to come out of nowhere. The wounds start doing the talking for us, and by that point, the damage is already done. Okay, so that's the problem, and it's a big one. But the good news is there's a really powerful antidote. So let's shift gears and talk about the solution, about how we can start building a much better way to communicate. And it all comes down to a practice called active listening. So what is this thing really? Well, the key word here is active. This is not a passive sport. It's a deliberate practice. It's about giving someone your absolute full attention. I'm talking ears, eyes, your whole nervous system to really get their meaning, their emotion, and the context behind what they're saying. And here's the kicker. The goal isn't to manage them or fix them. It's to make them feel truly, deeply understood. And it's just as important to know what it isn't. Active listening is not just waiting for your turn to talk. It's not jumping in to solve their problem for them. And it is absolutely not sitting there quietly planning your brilliant takedown of their argument. No, instead, it's all about presence, being there, curiosity, wanting to know more, reflection, showing you heard them, and validation, letting them know their feelings make sense. All right, that's the theory. Sounds good, right? But how do we actually, do it? Let's get into the practical stuff, the actual toolkit. Now, these techniques are pretty simple, but I'll be honest, they're not always easy. They definitely take some practice. Okay, the very first and maybe the most powerful rule of all can be summed up in just two numbers, 90-10. So here it is, the 90-10 rule. It means they talk 90% of the time and you talk 10%. And that 10% you get, it's not for your big speech, it's for asking good questions and reflecting back what you heard to show them you're really with them. I'm telling you, this one little shift completely changes the whole dynamic of a conversation. A huge piece of that 10% is what we call reflection, and you can think about it in 3 levels. Level 1 is just reflecting the content, the basic facts, like, so, the deadline got moved up this morning. Simple. Level 2 is reflecting the feeling you're picking up, and that sounds like it left you feeling pretty anxious. See? And level 3, if you get there, is reflecting the deeper meaning, which sounds like it connects to that bigger pattern we've talked about. It shows you're not just hearing the words, you're hearing the music behind them. The other thing you do with your 10% is ask small, open questions. So instead of a question like, why'd you do that? Which, can sound super judgy, you ask something that opens things up. Questions like, what part of that felt the worst? Or the absolute game changer. What do you need from me right now? That one question shifts you from being a problem solver to being a real partner. Okay, but here's a really important reality check. Compassion without capacity is just a promise you can't keep. You can't pour from an empty cup. So before you jump in to be a great listener, you gotta ask yourself, do I actually have the energy for this right now? Seriously, if the answer is no, it is so much better to be honest and say, can we talk later, than to pretend you're listening when you're just not there. I know, this probably sounds like a lot of work, and it can be. So why bother? Well, because the payoffs are absolutely huge. We're talking about things that impact everything from your own stress levels to your team's actual performance. Think about it. When people actually feel heard, conflicts just de-escalate. Trust goes way up. When you actually understand the real problem, you make way better decisions. And at work, getting that clarity up front saves you from countless hours of rework and wasted effort. So here's the thing. This is not some fluffy soft skill. It has hard, measurable benefits. At the end of the day, being heard is basically the glue in our relationships. At work, in your friendships, with your partner, with your kids, it doesn't matter. That feeling of being truly seen and understood, that's what builds real loyalty and trust that can weather any storm. Okay, let's make this super practical. I want to give you a concrete challenge so you can start putting these skills into practice, like this week. So here's a simple 1-week listening sprint. Give it a try. Day 1, do nothing but notice. Just track how many times you interrupt someone. No judgment, just awareness. A couple days later, on day 3, try to practice reflection. Just once. So it sounds like you're saying X and that makes you feel Y. That's it. By day 5, try the 5-second pause. When someone finishes talking, count to 5 in your head before you speak. It will feel like an eternity, but it is so powerful. Then at the end of the week, just look back and see what you noticed, and maybe pick one thing you want to keep doing. And one last thing, a little tool you can keep in your back pocket for any important conversation. It's a micro checklist. Before you dive in, just run through it real quick. Phone away, notifications off. Check. Ask them what they need. Are we just listening, thinking, or deciding? Check. Remember the 90-10 rule. It's just a simple little cheat sheet to keep yourself on track and focused on what matters. Listening. Look, let's be real. Active listening isn't some magic wand. It's not going to solve every single problem. But what if it could do something just as important? What if it could just turn down the volume on all the noise? The noise of misunderstanding, of defensiveness, of us just making stuff up in our heads. What if it could create just enough quiet space for the truth to finally get through? Because sometimes that's all you need.